like to thank you for coming to AerOhio Skydiving Center. There are many choices about how and where to make a skydive, and we are grateful to have earned your trust. Please rest assured that the staff at AerOhio is among the most experienced and professional available anywhere in the world. All of us will do our best to make sure that your training is thorough and that you have a safe and enjoyable skydive. By this time, you have been informed of the inherent risks of skydiving and have agreed to the terms contained in the Hold Harmless Agreement. By coming to skydive, you have joined a unique group of individuals and are willing to accept these risks in order to experience this fabulous sport. If you have second thoughts about taking the risks, you are permitted to change your mind at any time, even if you are already in the airplane. Please do not be afraid to speak out. No one will think any less of you for it. There are some important things that you need to know about this video. First, this video is in no way intended to replace proper instruction from a licensed skydiving instructor. It would be foolish and nearly suicidal to make a skydive if the only training that you receive is this video. Do not do it. This video is to be used as a training aid in conjunction with a properly administered first jump training course that meets industry standards as set forth by the United States Parachute Association. All of the instructors with whom you jump are licensed by the United States Parachute Association, and there is no other legitimate agency that licenses instructors in the U.S. Complete documentation of each instructor's qualifications is available at our Manifest office. Feel free to ask for it today, and by all means ask for the same documentation anytime you jump at a new skydiving center. Legitimate instructors are never offended by being asked to produce their licenses. Second, skydiving instruction is in a constant state of evolution, and not every situation in skydiving has a simple solution that will work every single time. There are scenes and statements in this video that may not be applicable to all of the situations that you will encounter. There are differences in equipment and technique in use at different skydiving centers. It is also possible that items shown in this video will be replaced with improved techniques or may need clarification as they apply to your skydive. Make absolutely sure that your instructor clarifies these differences and that you fully understand what you are doing. Third, some of the scenes in this video were shot by professional skydivers assuming the roles of students. Some scenes are real students during real student skydives and parachute descents. It is probable that you will notice differences in the equipment being used and in the technique used during freefall, canopy flight, and landing. Be certain that you understand the equipment and correct technique for you to use on your skydive. Fourth, bear in mind that there is nothing that says you have to make your skydive today. If you find yourself exhausted from the training process, you are more than welcome to take a rain check and jump another day. There is no financial penalty for doing this as long as you return to make your jump within 60 days. If you feel that you need additional training, that also can be provided for you. Finally, it is your duty to ask questions, and it is our obligation to answer them to the best of our ability. As stated previously, not every situation you will encounter will have a definite solution that guarantees the outcome. However, everything that we will teach you today has been proven to offer the best chance for you to have a safe and successful skydive. It is often said that there is no such thing as a stupid question about skydiving. This is absolutely true, due to the fact that so few know anything more about skydiving other than that which they have seen on television. Unfortunately, Hollywood offers little reality, especially when it comes to modern skydiving instruction. In addition, the daredevil hype offered up by the media has little basis in truth.
Sir, here you go.
Hey.
Ever done this before?
No, but I've seen it on TV. Johnny, you're about to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. How do you feel about that?
Come on, Johnny! You can do it!
All
So please try to ignore most of what you've heard and pay close attention to what you are being taught and ask for clarification when there is something that you do not understand. If you do these things and apply your training properly, you have the best chance of experiencing an exhilarating but uneventful skydive. Thanks once again for coming to 1-800-SKYDIVE, AerOhio Skydiving Center. If you need more information or wish to refer friends to us, please call, or you may find us on the web at www.jumptoday.com. Our genuine hope is that you will return to make many more skydives with us. If you enjoy skydiving as much as we do, we welcome you to join our family of fun-loving skydivers and make it a way of life, as we have made it ours. This chapter explains the components and their functions in a parachute system. The parachute system consists of 4 separate components, which are assembled together in one system, commonly called a rig. These components are the harness container, the main parachute, the reserve parachute, and the automatic activation device known as an AAD. The skydiver wears the harness container system, and the skydiver is held in by 3 separate points of attachment. When properly fastened and adjusted, it is virtually impossible to fall out of the rig. Once the instructor has adjusted your rig, do not loosen or remove anything. This is a critical safety rule. On the back of the harness is the container, which holds both the main and reserve parachutes. The main parachute is packed in the lower half, and the reserve parachute is packed in the upper half. There are 2 important safety devices on student rigs: the AAD, or Automatic Activation Device, and the RSL, or Reserve Static Line. The AAD is a microprocessor controlled device which senses altitude and vertical rate of descent. If a skydiver is still traveling downward at a high speed, when he reaches approximately 1,000 feet off the ground, this device will activate and initiate the deployment of the reserve parachute. The AAD is only a backup device, and no one should ever consider it to be a substitute for initiating proper emergency procedures. The RSL is a simple lanyard which attaches between the main parachute and the reserve ripcord cable. Its function is to assist in pulling the reserve cable when a skydiver performs a cutaway from a malfunctioned parachute. Like the AAD, it is a backup device only and should only be considered as such. The main parachute is deployed by a pilot chute, which is packed up in a small spandex pouch on the bottom of the container. The pilot chute is a small round parachute approximately 30 inches in diameter. Initiating the deployment of your main parachute is simple. At approximately 5,500 feet, you will begin your pull sequence with a wave off, arch, sweep, feel, and throw your pilot chute. When the pilot chute is launched, it inflates instantly with the 120 mile/hour wind and begins the opening sequence. The main container is held closed by a curved metal closing pin. When this pin is extracted, the main bag is lifted from the container by the pilot chute. Then, the lines of the parachute are pulled tight and the parachute comes out of its bag. Once out of the bag, the parachute is free to open. The pilot chute, bridle, and bag are attached to the top of the parachute and will be seen trailing behind the main parachute. The reserve parachute opens in a similar fashion, but it is held closed by a metal pin attached to the end of a metal cable. At the other end of the cable is a silver metal ripcord handle that is seated securely inboard on the left front webbing of the harness. This is the handle which activates the reserve parachute. When this handle is pulled, the closing pin is removed, which allows a spring-loaded pilot chute to deploy into the air. The deployment then continues in a manner similar to that described earlier for the main parachute. There is no need to throw the pilot chute for a reserve, as the spring inside it takes care of that action. Unlike the main parachute, the reserve pilot chute, bridle, and bag are not connected to the reserve canopy. After deployment, this free bag assembly floats down independently from the parachute. This is another important safety feature found only on Ram Air reserves. Along with years of airfoil and design improvements, this helps to give the Ram Air Reserve parachute its remarkable reliability. The main parachute is attached to the harness container system by a device called a 3-ring release. This device is a load-bearing release system which allows a skydiver to jettison a malfunctioned main parachute. Once the skydiver has fallen away from the malfunctioned main parachute, he is able to deploy the reserve into clean air above him and avoid a potential entanglement. The 3-ring is a very simple device. On the parachute harness is one ring, which is the attachment point for the risers. The risers are the means which connect the main parachute to the harness through the 3-ring release. The main parachute's lines are attached to the top end of the risers. The 2 smaller rings are attached to the bottom end of the risers, and these rings are threaded one through another and locked into place by a yellow Teflon-coated release cable. These Teflon cables are connected to the red cutaway handle, which is a fabric pillow located on the right inboard side of the parachute harness. Pulling the red handle disconnects the 3-ring and allows the jumper to fall away from a malfunctioned main parachute. Always remember that the only way to jettison a malfunctioned main canopy is to pull the red cutaway handle. Neither the AAD nor the RSL or pulling the silver reserve ripcord handle will do this for you. That is why it is important to always pull the red cutaway handle first when executing a cutaway. There is one riser set on each side of the harness, both of which have a front and a rear riser. When viewed from the side, the risers appear as a V, which suspends the skydiver below the main parachute lines. The risers are approximately 2 feet long. A total of 4 line groups exist. One line group goes to each quarter of the parachute. On the back of both rear risers is a metal retaining ring through which the main parachute's steering lines pass. At the end of the steering line is a yellow fabric loop called a steering toggle. There are 2 steering toggles, and they are often referred to as brakes. These terms are interchangeable, and both are commonly used throughout this video and in skydiving lingo. The toggles are both held in place by a narrow Velcro strip. The toggle is larger than the retaining ring, and it will easily stay reachable on the back of each rear riser above the canopy pilot's head, even after the brakes are unstowed and in use. At the top of the risers, the parachute suspension lines are connected, and they should run in a straight and orderly fashion up to the bottom of the canopy. In between the 4 line groups, there is a rectangular piece of fabric called a slider. The slider has 4 grommet holes, 1 in each corner. One set of lines passes through each grommet. Its function is to control the parachute as it opens. First, by separating the line groups from each other during the opening, and second, by slowing the opening just enough so that it is comfortable for the skydiver while still allowing the parachute to open quickly. Most parachute openings take between 3 and 6 seconds from the time the pilot chute is thrown. Occasionally, an opening can be more brisk, and occasionally it will be slower. Initially, the slider is packed at the top of the lines. When the parachute opens, the lines begin to spread apart as the canopy inflates from side to side. This action forces the slider down the lines. In the fully deployed position, the slider should come to rest at the bottom of the lines, just above the risers. It serves no other function at this point. The slider needs to be at least halfway down the lines for the canopy to have an acceptable descent rate. Up at the top of the lines is the main parachute. The ram air or square canopy was developed over 30 years ago, and it is the only type of parachute used in civilian skydiving today. The parachutes that you will jump today have been designed specifically for student use and represent the state-of-the-art skydiving training. The canopy is rectangular in shape and resembles a harmonica. It consists of 9 cells that are actually long, airtight tubes. These are sewn together span-wise to form an airfoil, which can glide at a ratio of nearly 3 feet forward for each foot down. The square parachute works on the ram air principle, needing forward speed to keep it inflated and flying. The leading edge of the canopy has 9 cell openings across the front, each of which is divided in half. This internal support structure is the means that forms the external surface of the parachute into a semi-rigid inflatable airfoil. The suspension lines are trimmed in length to hold the leading edge slightly lower than the trailing edge of the parachute. This difference in attitude creates a glide path which allows the canopy to fill with air and become pressurized internally. The canopy pilot's weight causes the parachute to move through the air so that it stays inflated as an airfoil and subsequently creates lift, just like an airplane wing. The canopy's speed and performance are determined by the weight of the canopy pilot in relation to the size of the parachute. In order to maintain the same predictable and docile flight characteristics for all canopy pilots, the heavier pilots will jump with larger parachutes, and the lighter pilots will jump with smaller parachutes. Full forward speed is obtained when both steering toggles are in the full up position. Likewise, slower speeds are obtained by pulling down both toggles equally. Steering is achieved by pulling the toggle down on the side in which direction the turn is desired. For a left turn, pull the left toggle down. For a right turn, pull the right toggle down. For most turns, the toggle is pulled down to the hip bone and the opposite toggle is left in the full up position. To stop turning, smoothly raise the toggle back to the full flight position. During training, the position of the toggles is referred to in 4 terms. The full flight position refers to having both of the toggles in the full up position. The number 1 position refers to holding both toggles evenly at the level of the pilot's shoulders. The number 2 position, or half brake position, refers to holding both toggles evenly at the level of the pilot's hip bones. And the number 3, or full brake position, refers to holding both toggles evenly down and inward to full arm extension. When fully inflated, the canopy will look straight and orderly. There are several common acronyms for checking the main parachute. One is the 3 S's. Your parachute needs to be square, steerable, and stable. Another is the 3 I's. Your parachute needs to be inflated, intact, and in control. These are explained in greater detail in the malfunction section of this video and reviewed during the practical training portion of this course. Better than 99% of the time, a modern parachute will open properly and without any hint of a problem. A non-scientific study performed at one leading skydiving center showed a parachute malfunction rate of less than 1 in 1,000 jumps. An informal survey has shown this to be a fairly accurate representation nationwide. Some individual skydivers claim a significantly better rate than this. Some have experienced results that are not nearly as good. Regardless, if you continue to skydive, you will experience a malfunction of some type someday, and knowing how to deal with it starts in this class today. Once you have determined that you have a malfunctioned parachute, the procedure to deal with it is relatively simple. In the case of most malfunctions, the solution is to perform a cutaway, also called a breakaway, and then pull your reserve. This procedure separates the skydiver from the malfunctioned parachute and allows for a clean opening of the reserve parachute above the free-falling skydiver. Since the standard cutaway covers the vast majority of situations, we will start first by teaching you how to execute a cutaway and then pull your reserve. You will see it repeated throughout this video. You will also practice this until proficient before every jump. Although most malfunctions can be dealt with by executing a cutaway and opening your reserve, there are some exceptions. These will be discussed as they pertain to different malfunction situations. First, initiate a strong arched body position. Look at the red cutaway handle on the right and grasp the handle. Then visually locate the silver handle on the left. Once you see the silver handle, keep your eyes on it. Then peel the red cutaway pillow away from the Velcro and pull it to full arm extension until all of the yellow cable has been completely cleared of the housing and it is no longer attached to the harness. Then throw the handle away. At this point, you will feel yourself fall away from a main parachute that has been released from your harness. Since your eyes are already on the silver handle, all that is necessary to complete the procedure is to pull the silver handle and throw it away too. To sum this up in a simpler manner, we will execute our emergency procedures as follows, starting with the count after throwing the main pilot chute. The main count is arch, sweep, feel, throw, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, check for your main parachute. Then you identify the malfunction. You would arch, look red, grab red, look silver, pull red, pull silver, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, check for your reserve parachute. At this time, you will have a reserve parachute open over your head. All modern reserve parachutes are of the ram air type, very similar to the main parachutes. What makes it so reliable is the way that it is packed, maintained, and deployed, as well as some design differences. Most reserves have 7 cells instead of 9 cells, and are slightly smaller than the main parachutes. However, most tandem reserves and some larger solo reserves are 9 cells. Reserve parachutes open more quickly and are 99.9% reliable, but they are just parachutes just the same. For this reason, maintaining a stable body position will help ensure a better opening, just like with the main parachute. Flying the reserve parachute is essentially the same as flying the main parachute. So all of the training that you will receive today for flying the main canopy also applies to your reserve. At this drop zone, the reserve parachutes are solid white. As mentioned in the equipment section, the reserve steering toggles are red as opposed to yellow on your main parachute. The toggles look the same and are stowed the same as on the main parachute, and the controllability check is done just the same as on your main parachute. All of the same procedures and flight characteristics apply to the reserve parachute. So you must fly your parachute to a safe landing area, avoid obstacles, and land in at least the number 2 position with your feet and knees together prepared for a parachute landing fall. There are 2 classifications of malfunctions, high speed and low speed. Neither of these is safe to land and must be dealt with immediately. The reason for the categories is to give the skydiver a reference as to how much time he would have to deal with these malfunctions. Also discussed at the end of this section are unusual deployments of the parachute, which are not considered to be malfunctions. In these situations, the parachute has opened, but there is a minor problem with the open parachute. In most of these cases, they are easily corrected and the parachute can be safely landed. In all of these cases, there is adequate time to react and deal with the problem, but there is never time to hesitate or waste. High-speed malfunctions occur when none or only part of the parachute deploys. The amount of drag created is minimal, and generally this means the skydiver remains at or close to normal freefall speeds. Each of these requires a prompt decision and accurate use of your emergency procedures. A total malfunction occurs when there is no deployment of the pilot chute or main parachute. The total malfunction is considered to be a high-speed malfunction since nothing is slowing the skydiver's free fall speed. The total malfunction appears in the video to look very much like a skydiver in free fall, as the main parachute is still in the container and the pilot chute has not been deployed. Causes are usually that the skydiver has failed to locate the pilot chute handle, or the pilot chute cannot be extracted from the pouch to initiate deployment. This type of malfunction is very rare and is easily prevented by being aware of the pilot chute handle location at all times and by executing a smooth arch, sweep, feel, and throw sequence at pull time. Rushing and flailing at pull time does nothing to improve the situation, nor does it get the parachute open more quickly. In the event that no one, meaning you or your instructors, has been able to extract and throw the pilot chute, your emergency procedure is simplified in that all that is necessary is to arch and pull the silver reserve handle with both hands. A pilot chute in tow occurs when the pilot chute is deployed but the main parachute remains locked in the container. There are a variety of causes for this, and it is sometimes similar to a horseshoe malfunction, which is discussed later. The pilot chute in tow is nearly as fast as a total malfunction, but like the total, occurrences are quite rare. The only way you will identify this malfunction is looking behind you to see the pilot chute towing behind you, as you will remain in a belly-to-earth position. The pilot chute and tow malfunction is dealt with by executing a cutaway and pulling the reserve handle. The bag lock is also a high-speed malfunction, as you can see by referencing the free fall speed of the skydiver with the free fall speed of the photographer. The bag lock malfunction occurs when the main parachute is trapped in the deployment bag. Notice that the lines are unstowed, but the deployment bag is closed. Many line twists can occur, pinning the skydiver's head down, making it difficult to identify. This malfunction is dealt with by executing a cutaway and by pulling the reserve. A streamer malfunction is where the parachute is deployed but fails to inflate properly because the slider is holding the parachute closed at the top of the lines. The drag created by this partial deployment slows the skydiver's free fall speed considerably in relation to other high-speed malfunctions, but it would not be safe to land in any case. The streamer creates the illusion that the parachute is trying to inflate. This is one of the reasons that skydivers count during parachute deployments, so that sufficient time is given for the parachute to inflate, but at the same time, you do not wait too long before initiating emergency procedures. If your parachute looks like this after the full count to 3,000 and remains this way while checking the canopy, it is time to execute a cutaway and pull the reserve. The horseshoe malfunction can happen two ways. One is when the container opens prematurely, but the pilot chute was not extracted from the pouch and thrown. The second is when the pilot chute has been thrown, but it or its bridle becomes wrapped around the skydiver's body. Either way, it is another fast malfunction and may be the most dangerous because after cutaway, it can cause the main pilot chute and parachute to remain tangled with the skydiver. As mentioned earlier, a pilot chute in tow and horseshoe can be similar or even the same in appearance. If the skydiver recognizes that the pilot chute has not been thrown, a quick attempt at finding the handle and throwing the pilot should be made if altitude permits. Likewise, if the pilot chute, bridle, or something else has wrapped around a limb or elsewhere, it is permissible to make a quick attempt to free it, but only if altitude permits. If the pilot chute can be deployed or released from the skydiver's body, a good parachute deployment may still occur. If the pilot chute or bridle is around the arm or leg, pointing that limb upwards, then kicking or shaking it will often help it come off. Again, it cannot be emphasized enough that the skydiver will still be traveling at a speed near terminal velocity, and altitude awareness must be maintained while dealing with this or any malfunction. If you are unable to release the pilot chute from its pouch or your body, you must be ready to execute a cutaway and pull your reserve. Even if the horseshoe malfunction is cleared and the main parachute begins to deploy, it is likely that you will still have some other kind of malfunction with the main parachute, and emergency procedures will need to be initiated. A low-speed malfunction occurs when all or part of the main parachute has come out of the container but has not taken the proper rectangular shape, is not flying straight, is not controllable, or is otherwise unsafe to land. These low-speed malfunctions are sometimes called partial malfunctions. The partial deployment of the main parachute will somewhat slow the skydiver's speed, which in turn gives the skydiver slightly more time to assess the problem. Regardless, a prompt decision and accurate use of emergency procedures is still important. Do not be made complacent by the term low speed, as the speed at which the skydiver would impact the ground would still cause severe or fatal injuries. The slider up malfunction is similar to the high-speed streamer in that it gives the illusion that the parachute will inflate at any moment. Notice, however, that some of the parachute cells are open and the slider is keeping the parachute from completely inflating. The severity of the problem will be determined by how far the slider has come down the lines. This picture could be just a slow deployment with a slowly descending slider. However, a parachute that looks like this for any length of time after deployment is likely to be experiencing a stuck slider and may not open any further. This is yet another reason for counting during deployment. If the parachute still has its slider hung up high on the lines after the full count of 3 and canopy check, then emergency procedures should be initiated. The slider up spinning malfunction is caused by the slider becoming stuck on the parachute lines on one side or the other during deployment. This is usually caused by small tension knots that have formed in the suspension lines that interfere, snag, or stop the slider from traveling down the lines. It is possible for the centrifugal force from the spin to cause the skydiver to become disoriented. The faster the spin, the more rapidly altitude is lost. This is the most common parachute malfunction and is easily recognizable. It also dictates that emergency procedures be initiated immediately because of the rapid loss of altitude that occurs when a parachute is spinning. The line-over malfunction is caused by one or more lines being wrapped over the top of the parachute during deployment. As you can see, the parachute is being choked off by the lines and is unable to fully inflate. Sometimes this malfunction can clear itself after just a few seconds, but the lines are more than likely to tighten as the parachute tries to inflate. The line-over malfunction is also likely to spin at a high rate of speed, eating up precious altitude. Emergency procedures should be initiated immediately. Another type of malfunction is caused when one or more lines is broken during deployment. The broken lines can be difficult to see by the person under the parachute. The parachute may look fully inflated, but could be turning slowly. It is also possible that it may be turning rapidly or not turning at all. The number of broken lines and the area in which they are broken drastically changes the parachute's flight characteristics. If one steering line is broken, a noticeable turn will develop shortly after opening. If other lines are broken, the result can be spinning, lack of control, inability to flare, or a high descent speed. If only one of the lines in the center of the canopy has broken, it may not severely affect the flight characteristics of the parachute at first, but it may cause an unacceptably hard landing. A controllability check to ensure that the parachute will fly straight, turn, and flare properly is essential. Damage to a parachute can be as severe as large holes and tears caused by a catastrophic failure to the parachute structure during the opening sequence. It can also be as small as a hole or tear the size of a baseball, which is caused from friction from the parachute lines against the fabric. Keep in mind that all parachutes have openings along the leading edge, and these should not be mistaken as holes. As a rule of thumb, if there is a hole as large as a volleyball, or if the skydiver can see all the way through the hole and see the sky above him, then it is time to initiate emergency procedures. Having both the reserve and main parachute deployed can occur due to the skydiver initiating the main deployment at a very low altitude. In this case, the AAD may activate, causing the reserve parachute to deploy along with the opening main. In some cases, two parachutes out can be caused by hard spiraling of the main parachute at an altitude which causes the AAD to activate. Both of these scenarios are easily avoided by very obvious means. First, always pull on time. Second, begin emergency procedures by 2,500 feet. And third, fly the parachute conservatively when below 1,500 feet. When both the main and reserve parachute have deployed, several things can happen. We will discuss the most and least likely scenarios and offer the best way to deal with each one. Keep in mind that virtually the only way to get in this situation is to have violated every rule governing pull altitudes, emergency procedures, and canopy flight that you will learn today. Even so, these two canopy out situations are not difficult to handle, providing that you recognize it and choose the best plan of action. If a skydiver finds himself with two parachutes open, generally one of four situations will occur. In most of these situations, it is best to land with both parachutes. The side-by-side and biplane scenarios are the most likely configurations, so they will be discussed in the most detail. In a side-by-side, the parachutes have both opened and are flying next to each other end to end. They will act like one wide parachute with the skydiver suspended between them. It is likely that the end cells from one canopy will be bumping against or at least be quite close to the end cells of the other parachute. The best way to steer this configuration is to steer the larger, more dominant parachute using only the rear risers. Steering input should be kept to a minimum, using only enough input to steer away from objects and into an open area. Generally, the side-by-side configuration will turn slowly on its own due to the difference in canopy types, but it will usually respond well to gentle rear riser inputs on the larger canopy. When landing, make no attempt to flare the parachute and perform a good parachute landing fall. In the biplane, both parachutes have opened and are flying in a configuration where one parachute is in front of the other and they are flying more or less in line. Since the lines of the reserve parachute are generally shorter than the lines of a main parachute, the parachutes will be at a slightly different height. This configuration appears similar to the wings of a biplane. In this case, it is best to only steer the parachute in front using the rear risers. Steer only as much as necessary to land in an open area. Again, there should be no attempt to flare and perform a good parachute landing fall. A less common but possible situation is the downplane. This occurs if both parachutes are open in a side-by-side but begin to fly away from each other and face downward towards the ground. This is easily recognizable because the parachutes are separated by a wide gap, usually 45 degrees or more. They both will face somewhat downward opposite of each other, and the skydiver will feel a significant downward speed. The best procedure is to pull the red cutaway handle to release the main parachute, then fly and land the reserve normally. It is possible to induce a downplane from a stable side-by-side configuration by using too much steering input. The time to deal with the downplane can be quite brief due to the downward speed and the fact that it may have happened at a low altitude in the first place. It is important to recognize and deal with the problem immediately. In some cases, after the main parachute has been released, the skydiver may not have time to unstow the brakes on the reserve and perform a flare, or the reserve may still be turning or decelerating. For these reasons, a good parachute landing fall is still very important. If the two parachutes are entangled and do not resemble any of these configurations, it is important to continue trying to inflate as much of the parachutes as possible for a softer landing. Sometimes, pulling in the less open parachute may help allow the more open parachute to further inflate. There is no sure answer to this scenario other than to keep trying to get as much fabric inflated as possible and never give up. Do not attempt to steer the parachutes or to flare when landing. A good parachute landing fall can make a big difference, and should be executed when landing this as well as any of the other situations. Unusual parachute openings happen to all skydivers from time to time. There are several common problems that can occur but can easily be fixed. These are not generally considered to be malfunctions, but are normal opening quirks of ram air parachutes. These scenarios are covered in this section and will also be reviewed when discussing flight characteristics of the main parachute. Try to keep in mind that in all likelihood, each of you will experience a normal open main parachute and an uneventful landing on your jump today. However, we must always learn, practice, and prepare to deal with a malfunction on every skydive. A pilot chute can sometimes come back under the front of a fully inflated parachute after the opening sequence. At times it will snag or rest in the lines under the canopy. This can also occur after a radical stall maneuver is done intentionally by a skydiver. Therefore, a radical stall is probably best avoided even when doing your controllability check. Stalls are discussed at greater length later in this video. As you can see in this case, the pilot chute's location is not causing any problem since the parachute is rectangular in shape, flying straight, and is controllable. Only in rare cases would having a pilot chute under the main canopy make it uncontrollable. Line twists are a common occurrence, and probably 25% of you will have some on your first few jumps. They also will occur from time to time during your skydiving career. Fortunately, they are not a big problem and are easily remedied. Line twists are usually caused by air currents twisting the bag which contains your parachute during the deployment sequence. Line twists do sometimes just happen, but they are more commonly caused or made worse by a poor body position. Try to imagine the deployment bag launching from a flat, stable surface like this table. It most likely will come off straight and even. If that surface were slanted or moving around, the bag will not launch level. At first, the line twists make it seem difficult to get your parachute under control. After a few seconds of untwisting, the parachute can be easily controlled and will be flying normally. Think of untwisting the lines as untwisting the chains on a swing of a schoolyard swing set. If you grab your risers and spread them apart and kick in the direction that is opposite the twist, the line's twists will come out in virtually all circumstances. This parachute had many line twists, which is much more than normally experienced. Still, it only took a bit of effort to deal with them and end up with a fully functional parachute. Rarely are line twists a reason for a cutaway, and even severe line twists can usually be fixed in less than 1 minute. If for some reason the line twists will not come out by 2,500 feet, you should begin your emergency procedures. It is possible that there is something else wrong. Going any further trying to fix the line twists may cause you to end up too close to the ground for a safe and uneventful cutaway. Another common occurrence is a situation where the slider has come down far enough that it is not causing a malfunction, but it has not come all the way down the lines. Often it appears to the skydiver to be 1/2 to 2/3 of the way down the lines. This is easily dealt with during a controllability check using the steering toggles. Simply release your brakes and pump them several times smoothly to the number 3 full brake position, and the slider will continue down to its resting position where the lines meet the risers. At times, this may have to be repeated. If the slider has not come to a resting point that is closer to the suspended skydiver than to the inflated canopy, it is probable that there is some other problem. This decision, like all others, needs to be made by 2,500 feet. End cell closure will usually happen during deployment, but it can also occur during a turn, a stall, or during air turbulence. This is also easily corrected. As you can see, this parachute is not spinning and is controllable even with the end cells closed. Parachutes usually will continue to fly straight or turn only slightly if the closed end cells occur on one side. The cure for this is the same as the cure for the slider resting only halfway down the lines. Simply release your brakes and pump them several times smoothly to the number 3 full brake position. On a modern 9-cell canopy, a safe landing can still be made with 7 of the 9 cells open. However, it is important to follow the procedure to open all 9 cells because it is always better to land with a fully inflated parachute. An important sequence to follow is to check the canopy from top to bottom, then make corrections from bottom to top. In doing so, you will first make sure that the canopy is open and properly deployed. Then, if you have line twists, they can be kicked out, or if your slider is hung up, it can be pumped down. Finally, end cell closure can be dealt with. A controllability check is done after the parachute is open to ensure that it will fly straight, perform turns, and flare properly for landing. To do this, release the brakes, perform a 360-degree right turn, then a 360-degree left turn. Follow this with a practice flare, going from full flight to the number 3 full brake position, and then let the toggles back up smoothly. During this check, the parachute should remain stable, steerable, and square. It should also be fully inflated, intact, and under control by the canopy pilot. Skydiving has several rules that should be followed for your entire skydiving career. We call these the golden rules. First, we have the free fall priorities. The most important thing you will do on any skydive is pull. The second priority is to pull at the correct altitude. And the third priority is to pull at the correct altitude while in a stable body position. We also have decision altitudes. The following altitudes are an important reference during free fall as a student skydiver. Your exit altitude will be anywhere from 10,000 to 14,000 feet. You will do your dive flow from exit to approximately 6,000 feet, wave off at 5,500 feet, and pull by 4,500 feet. Your main canopy should be open somewhere above 3,000 feet. You will do your canopy controllability check from opening to 2,500 feet and make your decision as to whether or not you need to cut away by 2,500 feet. If you do cut away, your reserve should be open by approximately 2,000 feet. It is important to remember that you never want to cut away your main parachute below 1,000 feet. There is one exception to this rule, and that is the downplane scenario with 2 canopies out. We also have landing priorities. These will be discussed more thoroughly in the main canopy chapter. Your first priority is to land with your parachute flying straight and level and do a good parachute landing fall. Your second priority is to land with your parachute flying straight and level in a clear and open area and do a good parachute landing fall. And finally, you need to land your parachute flying straight and level in a clear and open area with a flare to at least the number 2 position and do a good parachute landing fall. By adhering to your dive flow, decision altitudes, pull priorities, and landing priorities, it is unlikely that you will ever need to apply most of these emergency procedures that you will learn today. After the pilot chute is thrown, the skydiver will count 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 and check his canopy. On the check, he looks over his right shoulder to visually confirm that the canopy has opened, or it is at least in the process of opening. First, perform a visual canopy check. As was discussed in the malfunction procedures, this check is done from top to bottom, and corrections are made from the bottom to the top. After any corrections are made, a controllability check will be performed. It is important to note that the skydiver becomes a canopy pilot after the parachute is open and will need to focus his thoughts on the task of piloting his parachute to a safe and successful landing. After the canopy is confirmed open and the line twists are cleared, reach up and put your hands firmly through the yellow steering toggles, located on the rear risers. You will notice that there is some excess stowed line by each toggle. This is stowed steering line waiting to be released. Parachutes are designed to open with the toggle stowed to the half brake or number 2 position. This keeps the canopy flying at an idle position until the skydiver is ready to control it. Setting the brakes and stowing the excess line is done each time the parachute is repacked for its next use. Each steering line passes through a retaining ring on the back of each rear riser. As the canopy opens, the steering line is pulled tight against the retaining ring. This keeps the steering toggle locked firmly into place. The steering lines are also called brake lines. To unstow the brakes, simply grab the toggles and pull down. This pulls the toggles away from the retaining ring and allows them to slip off the loop, which locks them in place. When you pull down the toggles for the first time, this is called unstowing the brakes. When the pilot unstows the brakes, the trailing edge of the canopy will become slightly higher than the leading edge of the canopy. This produces the gliding attitude, and the canopy will accelerate to full flight. The leading edge is often called the nose of the canopy, and the trailing edge is often called the tail. Once the toggles are in your hands, keep your hands firmly through them all the way to the ground until you have landed. Keeping your hands through the toggles is like a pilot keeping his hands on the controls of his airplane. The only reason to remove them is if you discover a problem with the parachute during the controllability check and you need to execute your emergency procedures. Normally, as the canopy begins to inflate and the slider begins to descend, it will travel at least to the halfway point down the lines. Rarely is the slider alone a reason for emergency procedures, but you must always visually confirm that it is down far enough. If the slider comes roughly halfway down the lines, it will allow the parachute to open. But if it does not travel all the way down, it can be brought down manually. This procedure is sometimes called pumping the brakes or pumping the slider. Pulling both toggles down to full arm extension, then raising them gently back to full flight, will usually bring the slider the rest of the way down the lines. This is a common procedure and is easily done. If you see one or both end cells flapping or uninflated, they can also be opened manually. The procedure is the same as pumping the brakes or pumping the slider, so simply repeat the process until the end cells are inflated. If the parachute begins to rock backward during this process, let the toggles up gently and try again. Once the end cells are completely open, smoothly let the toggles back up to the full flight position. If the canopy opens straight and normal and one brake released for whatever reason, the canopy would begin a rapid turn. The result is that the canopy turns toward the still stowed brake. The correction for this is to reach up and pull both toggles to unstow the brake. Pulling both toggles will eliminate the decision of which toggle to pull. If the parachute is still turning after both brakes are unstowed, emergency procedures must be initiated. The upper end of each steering line is connected to several smaller lines which fan out and are sewn to the trailing edge of the canopy. When the canopy pilot pulls both toggles down, he is pulling down the entire trailing edge of the canopy. By doing this, greater resistance is created horizontally against the flow of air around the canopy, and the canopy will slow down. The further down the toggles are pulled, the more forward speed will be reduced until a canopy stall is produced. All square canopies have 5 modes of flight: full flight, quarter brakes or the number 1 position, half brakes or the number 2 position, full brakes or the number 3 position, and stall. A normal landing is either in the number 2 half brake position or the number 3 full brake position. Landing in the full flight mode, the number 1 position, or in a stall is likely to cause injury and should be avoided. Full flight is achieved by flying with the toggles all the way up, which streamlines the parachute. This produces the least drag and creates the optimum amount of lift, thereby offering the best horizontal and glide characteristics. Parachutes can be safely flown in all flight modes but stall. However, they glide, maneuver, and perform best when flown in the full flight mode. In the quarter brakes or number 1 position, the toggles are pulled equally down level with the pilot's shoulders. This mode of flight is used to fly the parachute at a slightly slower speed than full flight. It is also used as a reference point for beginning the flare for landing the parachute. This is the mode of flight in which the canopy is set for opening. In the half brakes or number 2 position, the toggles are equally pulled down level with the canopy pilot's hip bones, which causes the canopy to slow down. This is because the trailing edge is pulled down even with the leading edge, and a cupping action slows the canopy to half speed. The full brakes mode, or number 3 position, causes the canopy to flare. This is because pulling the toggles fully down reduces the canopy's forward speed and the canopy's vertical descent at the same time until it reaches the flare point. The number 3 full brake position is the ideal mode in which to touch down for landing. When in full flight, you will have the opportunity to practice a flare for landing. This is done starting in the full flight position with the toggles fully up. They are then pulled evenly downward to the number 1, number 2, and finally to the number 3 position. Your canopy will slow as the leading edge raises. The cupping effect of the tail will produce a braking action which creates additional lift. This slows both the vertical and horizontal speed. The flare is the optimum mode of flight for landing the parachute. Landing in the number 2 position will also produce an acceptable landing in most cases. The flare is in effect before the stall and will exist as long as the canopy has some forward speed. The flare should not be started higher than 15 feet because a stall could develop before touchdown. There are about 5 to 10 seconds of flare before the canopy will begin to enter a stall. If the flare is initiated too high, the canopy pilot will land in a backward rocking motion. Your landing count will start in the full flight position and follow through to positions number 1, 2, and 3. This landing count, when begun approximately at 15 feet above the ground and finished prior to touching the ground, will usually produce the best landing. A maneuver called a brake turn can be used when the pilot needs to turn but wants to lose only the minimum amount of altitude. To perform this turn, both toggles are pulled to at least the number 1 or quartered brake position. Then the toggle in the direction of the desired turn is pulled a few inches lower than the opposite toggle. This slower type of turn can be used when the pilot is avoiding obstacles at the last moment. It should be stressed, however, that the canopy pilot is still at a great risk of injury when landing in a brake turn. The brake turn is preferable to a last-moment panic turn in which the pilot spirals into the ground at a higher rate of speed. An abrupt turn performed within the last 100 feet of descent will virtually guarantee a serious injury or even death. Always choose your landing area and flight plan by 1,000 feet, especially if you are landing off the drop zone. If you follow your flight plan and make your decisions about landing at a higher altitude, maneuvers such as brake turns will not be necessary. It is the sole responsibility of the canopy pilot to ensure that a canopy is indeed safe to land. Remember that you are now a canopy pilot and the ultimate decision of where and how you will land rests on you alone. As in all aviation, the pilot in command is responsible for making the decisions that affect the safety and success of the flight. In most cases, you will have radio assistance which will help you to locate the drop zone, maneuver, and land the canopy. However, as pilot in command, you have the authority to do whatever is necessary to ensure a successful landing. Once you are confident that the parachute will land you safely, it is time to enjoy the canopy flight. Most parachutes have a forward speed of 20 miles per hour. If the canopy is flying in wind conditions of 10 miles per hour, it will have a higher or lower ground speed depending on which way the canopy faces. If the pilot faces directly into the 10 mile per hour wind, its speed across the ground will be 10 miles per hour. Flying facing into the wind is called holding. When traveling across the wind's direction, the canopy will fly ahead at 20 miles per hour, but will also be moving sideways across the ground. Flying across the wind line is called crabbing. If the pilot faces directly away from the 10-mile-an-hour wind, its speed across the ground will be 30 miles per hour. Flying with the wind is called running. More distance can be covered across the ground when traveling with the wind. For this reason, the skydivers exit the aircraft upwind of the landing area and use the wind to maneuver to the target. In a zero wind condition, the canopy's speed and range it can travel across the ground will be the same in all directions. In this situation, the skydivers will exit the aircraft directly over the landing area. Most of the time, there is a prevailing wind from one direction or another. In these conditions, a common mistake is for the canopy pilot to run toward the landing area and then have to hold into the wind until landing. It is better to stay upwind of the landing area and work towards the target by flying crosswind back and forth. Remember that turning causes a more rapid loss of altitude. Below 1,500 feet, no turns in excess of 360 degrees should be performed. Below 1,000 feet, turns should not be done in excess of 180 degrees at a time. Below 500 feet, only 90-degree turns should be performed. By 300 feet above the ground, turns should not exceed 45 degrees, and the parachute should be set up into the wind and only slight toggle corrections should be used. In order to allow canopy pilots a reference point and a procedure for landing, there are two important concepts that must be learned. First is the 1,000-foot holding area, and second is the landing pattern. The 1,000-foot holding area is an imaginary point upwind of the landing area. Each canopy pilot should try to fly his canopy into this area when he is getting close to 1,000 feet above the ground. Being in this area at the right altitude greatly improves the chances of setting up properly to fly a successful landing pattern. The landing pattern is a path around the landing area which all canopies fly in order to approach and land without interfering with each other. From the 1,000-foot holding area, the canopy pilot will fly past the landing area with the intended touchdown point at his left side. The wind will be at his back, so this is called the downwind leg of the pattern. At approximately 600 feet, he will turn 90 degrees to his left and fly crosswind. The landing area will still be to his left. This is called the base leg or crosswind leg of the pattern. At approximately 300 feet above the ground, the final 90-degree turn is made when downwind of the intended touchdown point. This is called the final approach, and this last left-hand turn will usually have the pilot faced directly into the wind. The location of the 1,000-foot holding area and the size and direction of the landing pattern change with different wind patterns and conditions. It is common for them to be altered periodically throughout the day. These will be discussed in detail in the practical section of your class. Each canopy pilot is responsible for reviewing a flight plan prior to every jump. Facing into the wind causes the parachute to have its slowest possible speed across the ground. The best way to determine wind direction is by looking at the windsock. Many times a wind streamer or wind blade is also available. A few other wind indicators would be the movement of trees or smoke. Although the best landing is made facing into the wind, it is better to land crosswind or downwind than to run into trees, wires, harmful obstacles, or to risk a last-moment panic turn to get facing into the wind. At times, the wind may turn the canopy slightly off the intended wind line while it is on final approach. It is permissible to make slight corrections, but usually being off the wind line will make very little difference. Therefore, it is best to concentrate on landing with your canopy flying straight and level in a clear and open area and at least the number 2 half-brake position. When performed properly, the number 3 full brake position will provide a flare which slows both the horizontal and vertical speed nearly to 0. Of course, a 0 rate of descent would be a nice way to land, but that is not always possible. If the toggles are in the number 3 full brake position for too long, a stall may develop. If a stall begins to develop, the correction would be to smoothly put the toggles up to the number 2 half brake position. This will allow the nose to lower and the canopy to begin flying forward again. In most cases, the radio operator will help you with the landing count, starting with full flight and going through to position 1, 2, and 3. If for any reason a flare with the number 3 full brake position is not possible, landing the canopy in the number 2 half brake position is the preferred option. For instance, if the landing is off the airport or on a sloping terrain, it would be better to let the canopy fly forward at half brakes instead of risking a stall flying at full brakes. In any case, landing in at least the number 2 half brakes position is the minimum action needed to provide an acceptable landing. A PLF should be performed on the first few jumps to allow for misjudging the landing flare. As a rule, keep your hands in front of you and try to turn your body to one side for the parachute landing fall. The hands should be kept inboard in front of the body with elbows in and feet and knees together. Do not try to stand up your landings, rather be prepared for a PLF every time. During the final approach and flare sequence, keep your chin level and eyes focused on the horizon. The parachute landing is taught in the practical section of this class. After landing, sometimes the canopy will stay inflated and begin to pull the pilot across the ground. The best procedure is to reel in one toggle until the canopy turns downward to start to collapse. Then try to get up and run around the canopy so that the wind no longer tries to inflate it. After landing, your excitement will be present for some time. Many skydivers describe it as a high or an adrenaline rush. The first thing you need to do is realize that you are back on the ground and that you need to safely get out of the landing area. You will need to walk back to the staging area and return your equipment. Please make sure that you put the yellow toggles back on the Velcro on the risers. Then gather up all of the canopy, its lines, and the pilot chute. Please avoid dragging it across the ground or snagging it on objects. Make sure that you can see where you are going and remember that you are on an active drop zone. It is possible that other canopies are landing and that aircraft are taking off and landing on the runways. Extreme caution must be used when approaching the runway. Aircraft can take off or land in either direction. When approaching the runway, stop and check both ends for aircraft on the runway. Next, check the air for aircraft approaching to land. If it appears clear, check one more time and start across the runway. If you hear a loud horn blast, please stop and look again. This is a warning that someone is in danger. If you have landed off the field or a lengthy walk appears imminent, Take a few extra moments to gather the canopy tightly, as it will be easier to carry back. Leave the equipment on and make sure you are still able to hear the radio. The staff may be trying to direct you to the best place to be picked up by our vehicle. If the landing is in corn or beans, try not to damage the crop when gathering the chute. The staff will monitor your position and provide a ride back to the drop zone. If you receive a ride back from a neighbor, try to make a call to the drop zone, as the staff will be out in force looking for you. If confronted by any neighbors or farmers, please be courteous and polite, as you are probably on their property or crops. Sometimes in the middle to late summer, the corn can be above your head and you may not be able to see your way out. Make sure that you orient yourself to the drop zone and that you walk in line with the rows of crops towards a fence line or road. When you arrive back at the staging area, please return all of the equipment by following the signs marked Equipment Return. A staff person will help you take off the rig. Please return your goggles, helmet, and altimeter and hang your jumpsuit back up on the rack. If you are using our gloves or our glasses strap, please return them as well. Please be patient and wait for your instructors to find you. They may be back up in the air with another student by now, but they will not forget you. Your instructors will debrief your jump with you, fill out your logbook, and present you with your first jump certificate. They will also provide you information about a second jump and discounts available if it is purchased today. Your instructors will debrief your video with you. If you cannot wait for your video to be done, it can also be mailed to you. Welcome again to the most exciting sport in the world. We hope you have a safe and successful skydive and that you return to make many more skydives with us in the future. Then visually locate the silver handle and pull it. First, identify, let's try that again.
Okay.
What makes it so reliable is the way that it's packed. The biplane, both parachutes, cut. A pilot chute under can sometimes, this slower turn can turn, in doing so, you will first make sure that the canopy is open and deployed. All modern reserve parachutes are of the ram air type, very similar to the main parachutes. What makes it so reliable is the way that it is packed, maintained, and deployed, as well as some design differences. Most reserves have 7 cells instead of 9 cells and are slightly smaller than the main parachutes. However, most tandem reserves and some larger solo reserves are 9 cells. Reserve parachutes open more quickly and are 99.9% reliable, but they are just parachutes just the same. For this reason, maintaining a stable body position will help ensure a better opening, just like with the main parachute. Flying the reserve parachute is essentially the same as flying the main parachute, so all of the training that you will receive today for flying the main canopy also applies to your reserve. At this drop zone, the reserve parachutes are solid white. As mentioned in the equipment section, the reserve steering toggles are red as opposed to yellow on your main parachute. The toggles look the same and are stowed the same as on the main parachute, and the controllability check is done just the same as on your main parachute. All of the same procedures and flight characteristics apply to the reserve parachute. So you must fly your parachute to a safe landing area, avoid obstacles, and land in at least the number 2 position with your feet and knees together prepared for a parachute landing fall. There are 2 classifications of malfunctions, high speed and low speed. Neither of these is safe to land and must be dealt with immediately. The reason for the categories is to give the skydiver a reference as to how much time he would have to deal with these malfunctions. Also discussed at the end of this section are unusual deployments of the parachute, which are not considered to be malfunctions. In these situations, the parachute has opened, but there is a minor problem with the open parachute. In most of these cases, they are easily corrected and the parachute can be safely landed. In all of these cases, there is adequate time to react and deal with the problem, but there is never time to hesitate or waste. High-speed malfunctions occur when none or only part of the parachute deploys. The amount of drag created is minimal, and generally this means the skydiver remains at or close to normal freefall speeds. Each of these requires a prompt decision and accurate use of your emergency procedures. A total malfunction occurs when there is no deployment of the pilot chute or main parachute. The total malfunction is considered to be a high-speed malfunction since nothing is slowing the skydiver's freefall speed. The total malfunction appears in the video to look very much like a skydiver in freefall, as the main parachute is still in the container and the pilot chute has not been deployed. Causes are usually that the skydiver has failed to locate the pilot chute handle, or the pilot chute cannot be extracted from the pouch to initiate deployment. This type of malfunction is very rare and is easily prevented by being aware of the pilot chute handle location at all times and by executing a smooth arch, sweep, feel, and throw sequence at pull time. Rushing and flailing at pull time does nothing to improve the situation, nor does it get the parachute open more quickly. In the event that no one, meaning you or your instructors, has been able to extract and throw the pilot chute, your emergency procedure is simplified in that all that is necessary is to arch and pull the silver reserve handle with both hands. A pilot chute in tow occurs when the pilot chute is deployed but the main parachute remains locked in the container. There are a variety of causes for this, and it is sometimes similar to a horseshoe malfunction, which is discussed later. The pilot chute in tow is nearly as fast as a total malfunction, but like the total, occurrences are quite rare. The only way you will identify this malfunction is looking behind you to see the pilot chute towing behind you, as you will remain in a belly-to-earth position. The pilot chute and tow malfunction is dealt with by executing a cutaway and pulling the reserve handle. The bag lock is also a high-speed malfunction, as you can see by referencing the freefall speed of the skydiver with the freefall speed of the photographer. The bag lock malfunction occurs when the main parachute is trapped in the deployment bag. Notice that the lines are unstowed, but the deployment bag is closed. Many line twists can occur, pinning the skydiver's head down, making it difficult to identify. This malfunction is dealt with by executing a cutaway and by pulling the reserve. A streamer malfunction is where the parachute is deployed but fails to inflate properly because the slider is holding the parachute closed at the top of the lines. The drag created by this partial deployment slows the skydiver's freefall speed considerably in relation to other high-speed malfunctions, but it would not be safe to land in any case. The streamer creates the illusion that the parachute is trying to inflate. This is one of the reasons that skydivers count during parachute deployments, so that sufficient time is given for the parachute to inflate, but at the same time, you do not wait too long before initiating emergency procedures. If your parachute looks like this after the full count to 3,000 and remains this way while checking the canopy, it is time to execute a cutaway and pull the reserve. The horseshoe malfunction can happen two ways. One is when the container opens prematurely, but the pilot chute was not extracted from the pouch and thrown. The second is when the pilot chute has been thrown, but it or its bridle becomes wrapped around the skydiver's body. Either way, it is another fast malfunction and may be the most dangerous because after cutaway, it can cause the main pilot chute and parachute to remain tangled with the skydiver. As mentioned earlier, a pilot chute in tow and horseshoe can be similar or even the same in appearance. If the skydiver recognizes that the pilot chute has not been thrown, a quick attempt at finding the handle and throwing the pilot should be made if altitude permits. Likewise, if the pilot chute, bridle, or something else has wrapped around a limb or elsewhere, it is permissible to make a quick attempt to free it, but only if altitude permits. If the pilot chute can be deployed or released from the skydiver's body, a good parachute deployment may still occur. If the pilot chute or bridle is around the arm or leg, pointing that limb upwards, then kicking or shaking it will often help it come off. Again, it cannot be emphasized enough that the skydiver will still be traveling at a speed near terminal velocity, and altitude awareness must be maintained while dealing with this or any malfunction. If you are unable to release the pilot chute from its pouch or your body, you must be ready to execute a cutaway and pull your reserve. Even if the horseshoe malfunction is cleared and the main parachute begins to deploy, it is likely that you will still have some other kind of malfunction with the main parachute and emergency procedures will need to be initiated. A low-speed malfunction occurs when all or part of the main parachute has come out of the container but has not taken the proper rectangular shape, is not flying straight, is not controllable, or is otherwise unsafe to land. These low-speed malfunctions are sometimes called partial malfunctions. The partial deployment of the main parachute will somewhat slow the skydiver's speed, which in turn gives the skydiver slightly more time to assess the problem. Regardless, a prompt decision and accurate use of emergency procedures is still important. Do not be made complacent by the term low speed, as the speed at which the skydiver would impact the ground would still cause severe or fatal injuries. The slider up malfunction is similar to the high-speed streamer in that it gives the illusion that the parachute will inflate at any moment. Notice, however, that some of the parachute cells are open and the slider is keeping the parachute from completely inflating. The severity of the problem will be determined by how far the slider has come down the lines. This picture could be just a slow deployment with a slowly descending slider. However, a parachute that looks like this for any length of time after deployment is likely to be experiencing a stuck slider and may not open any further. This is yet another reason for counting during deployment. If the parachute still has its slider hung up high on the lines after the full count of 3 and canopy check, then emergency procedures should be initiated. The slider up spinning malfunction is caused by the slider becoming stuck on the parachute lines on one side or the other during deployment. This is usually caused by small tension knots that have formed in the suspension lines that interfere, snag, or stop the slider from traveling down the lines. It is possible for the